Yeah, male's got several stab wounds to his leg and one in his chest. NWAS on the scene at the moment. We'll update you further shortly. Right, so they're all playing on the PlayStation, and these two lads have run in.
They've just walked in.
Never seen them before. Got their faces covered.
Yeah, their faces covered.
Let's get some pressure on them, all right?
It began with something small. Just a few angry words between two teenagers. Moments of pride, the kind that flares up fast when you're young. It should have ended there. A forgettable argument, nothing more. But pride doesn't fade. It lingers. And when pride mixes with anger, it can grow into something dangerous. And then, someone pulled out a knife. What should have been a forgettable argument turned deadly at last. This is the story of teenagers, of pride, betrayal, and one decision that destroyed 3 lives and scarred a community. This isn't just a crime story. It's about the lives behind the headlines, the families left grieving, and the lessons we must all learn. If you believe stories like this deserve to be told with honesty and respect, hit like and subscribe to the channel right now. It's the only way stories like his aren't forgotten. Sarmad was the kind of boy who lived for the small joys of teenage life. Football with friends, gaming sessions that stretched late into the night, hanging around the familiar streets of Preston. He came from a close family who cared deeply for him, and although he sometimes got caught up in the wrong crowd, he was still a boy at heart, not yet a man. Those who knew him said he was funny, sometimes cheeky, but never the kind of person you imagined would end up in the headlines of a national tragedy. Jamie Dixon was 2 years older. At 18, he carried himself differently. He was already known to police, already building a reputation on the streets. Jamie wasn't someone who trusted authority. If something happened, he handled it himself. He had a temper and people knew it, but he was also confident and in his own circle respected. He and Sarmad had once been on friendly terms. They knew the same people, crossed the same paths, and had even been close at one time. But things were about to change. It happened in the summer of 2020. A normal day turned into a fight, the kind of sudden clash that can happen between young men when words get heated and pride gets in the way. In the middle of it all, Sarmad pulled out a knife. In a split second, he slashed Jamie across the wrist. The wound was deep and left Jamie bleeding heavily. It was a dangerous injury, one that could have been much worse. Sarmad ran, and the fight was over, but the damage was done. For most people, that would have been the end. A terrible mistake, a scar to remind them of what happens when things go too far. But Jamie Dixon was not like most people. He didn't see the cut on his wrist as the end. He saw it as the beginning. He made one decision that day. He would not let this go. He would get even, no matter how long it took. Over the following months, Jamie's wrist began to heal, but his anger never did. By December 2020, Jamie Dixon had been waiting for months. He was waiting for the right time, the right excuse, the perfect chance to strike. That excuse came from someone close to both him and Sarmad, a boy named Asad Hussein. Asad was 17. He wasn't known for violence in the same way as Dixon, but he had his own reputation. He dealt small amounts of cannabis, making pocket money through low-level street dealing. Weeks before Christmas, he had fronted Sarmad £25 worth of cannabis. It was a small amount, but Sarmad never paid him back. At first, it was little more than an irritation, a debt among teenagers, the kind of thing that usually fizzles out on its own. But when Jamie Dixon found out, he saw something else. He saw an opening. Jamie floated an idea. Asad would arrange to meet Sarmad under the pretense of sorting out the debt. While they spoke, Jamie and his closest friend, 16-year-old Lemar Forbes, would be waiting nearby, weapons in hand. It was bold, risky, even bizarre. But surprisingly, Asad didn't hesitate. He agreed. And just like that, over a debt of £25, a plan was born. A plan that would end in blood. December 23rd, 2 days before Christmas. Sarmad thought it was just another afternoon. He had been invited to a friend's house to play PlayStation. For 2 hours, it was just that. Ordinary teenage life, laughter and games in the conservatory. But outside, shadows were moving. Jamie Dixon and Lemar Forbes were there. They were dressed in dark clothing, carrying knives. CCTV cameras captured them pacing restlessly up and down the street, drawing their weapons, sliding them back into their sheaths, waiting. It was clear they weren't there by accident. Inside the house, Sarmad had no idea what was about to unfold. Earlier that day, he and Asad had spoken about the debt. He agreed they would talk, maybe settle it. It seemed routine. But the moment Asad heard Sarmad's location, he passed it straight to Jamie Dixon. The trap was set. At around 5:20 p.m., Asad arrived at the house. He was armed too, but calm. Sarmad trusted him enough to let him in. Together, they walked through to the conservatory, where Sarmad and his friends were gathered. On the surface, it looked normal. Friends hanging out, nothing unusual. But Asad's behavior shifted. He was restless, edgy. He knew Jamie was close. He also knew Sarmad carried a knife, and that knife had to be dealt with first. With smooth words and quiet pressure, Asad persuaded Sarmad to set it aside. For a brief moment, confusion flickered across Sarmad's face. Why would his own friend want him disarmed? But before the thought could settle, the decision was made. Sarmad laid the knife down. By the time he realized what was happening, it was too late. Outside, Jamie Dixon and Lemar Forbes were ready. All they needed was the signal. The house on Chatham Place was quiet. In the conservatory, the boys sat around. To Sarmad, it felt like an ordinary evening. He had no idea what was waiting just beyond the glass. Outside, Jamie Dixon and Lemar Forbes were pacing. CCTV later showed them moving back and forth, restless, drawing their blades, sliding them back into place over and over. Each step on the driveway brought them closer to the moment they had been planning for months. The air was cold, the December sky already dark, and in that darkness, the weight of what they carried was about to explode. Inside, Asad had done what Dixon needed. With careful words, he had convinced Sarmad to put down his knife. It was the one thing that gave Sarmad an edge, and now it was out of reach. Asad gave the signal, a look, a nod, just enough. In an instant, Dixon and Forbes burst through the door. They didn't shout, they didn't hesitate. They went straight for Sarmad. Armed with a machete and a hunting knife, they attacked with brutal force. The room erupted in chaos as the blades struck again and again. 12 stab wounds in total, to his chest, to his legs, each strike deeper than the last. One wound cut more than 14 centimeters into his body. It was frenzied, merciless, over in seconds. Sarmad collapsed, bleeding heavily. His friends screamed, frozen in shock, unable to process what they had just seen. Blood covered the floor of the conservatory, the air filled with panic. The boys who had moments ago been laughing at a video game were now scrambling, shouting, their voices breaking as they dialed for help. Dixon and Forbes didn't look back. They fled into the night, leaving carnage behind. For them, it was done. But for everyone left in that room, it was just beginning. The 999 calls came quickly, desperate voices on the line, words tumbling out between sobs and gasps. "He's been stabbed! Please, please, hurry!" Dispatchers tried to steady the callers, to get details, but the scene was frantic, voices overlapping, fear heavy in the air. Minutes later, sirens pierced the silence of Chatham Place. Police cars pulled up outside. Paramedics rushed through the door and into the conservatory. What they found was grim. A 16-year-old boy lying in a pool of blood, barely clinging to life. His breathing shallow, his pulse fading. The fight for Sarmad's life had begun. The conservatory floor was slick with blood. The sound of shouting filled the house as Sarmad's friends tried to stay calm, their voices cracking as they begged him to hold on. Outside, blue lights washed over the street. Police and paramedics rushed in, pushing past shocked neighbors who had gathered at the noise. The paramedics didn't waste a second. They dropped their bags and went straight to Sarmad. His pulse was weak, his chest barely rose. They knew he didn't have time to wait for hospital. Right there on the living room floor, they performed emergency surgery. One medic cut open his chest, hands working quickly to reach his heart. Another began massaging it manually, trying to force it to keep beating.
Let's get some pressure on him, all right?
It was desperate, brutal work, but it was the only chance he had. Police officers spread out through the house, stepping carefully around the blood. They needed answers, and fast. Who had done this? Why? Witnesses pointed in every direction, too shaken to make sense of what they'd just seen. Among them was Asad Hussein. He hadn't run. He stayed inside, blending into the chaos, playing the part of a bystander. To officers arriving at the scene, he looked like just another terrified teenager.
Right, so they're all playing on the PlayStation, and these two lads have run in.
They've just walked in.
Never seen them before. They've got their faces covered.
They had their faces covered.
When questioned, he gave a simple version of events. Two masked lads had burst in, gone straight for Sarmad, and attacked him without a word. He made it sound random, sudden, like something no one could have predicted. But detectives weren't convinced. Something in the way he spoke didn't fit. And as the night wore on, more pieces of the puzzle began to emerge. Back in the street, Dixon and Forbes were already gone. Barely half a mile away, they regrouped at another house. Dixon stripped off his blood-stained clothes and set them on fire, trying to erase the evidence. But cameras caught him later, barefoot in the street, unaware that his every move was being recorded. Forbes, on the other hand, couldn't resist showing off. He pulled out his phone, recording himself waving the hunting knife still smeared with blood and tissue. On camera, he bragged, "I stabbed Sarmad up with this. Look, his flesh is there." Inside the house on Chatham Place, paramedics finally managed to stabilize Sarmad enough to move him. He was rushed to Royal Preston Hospital under blue lights, his life hanging by a thread. For his friends and family, Christmas would never be the same again. In the hours after the attack, detectives were left with more questions than answers. Who were the masked attackers? Why had they gone straight for Sarmad? And how had they known where to find him? Witnesses were shaken, their stories blurred by fear. But police had one advantage. Preston was covered in cameras, and cameras don't forget. The first breakthrough came quickly. CCTV from the street showed two figures outside the house just before the stabbing. They weren't random passers-by. They were pacing, restless, dressed in dark clothes, drawing long blades from their sheaths and sliding them back again. Even with their faces covered, their movements told a story. These weren't strangers. They were waiting for Sarmad. More footage soon surfaced. Just minutes before the attack, the same two boys had been inside a nearby shop. They bought energy drinks, masks still pulled up. But in a careless moment, one of them tugged his mask down at the counter. The camera caught his face clearly. It was 16-year-old Lemar Forbes. Detectives dug deeper, pulling phone records. They discovered something chilling. A call made between Forbes and Asad Hussein, just seconds before the stabbing. That single call placed Asad not as a witness, but as part of the setup. CCTV from a neighboring house confirmed it. Asad had walked up the street, looked directly at Dixon and Forbes as they waited with weapons in hand, then walked inside. No words were spoken, but the glance said everything. Meanwhile, officers tracked down social media activity. They found Snapchat voice notes sent by Dixon and Forbes the very same night. In their own voices, they bragged about what they had done. Forbes even filmed himself, knife still dripping with blood, laughing about the attack. He thought it was proof of his toughness. Instead, it became evidence of murder. The net tightened quickly. Lemar Forbes was arrested first. Police caught up with him within a day. Jamie Dixon, however, tried to vanish. For a short time, he was nowhere to be found. Then, unexpectedly, he walked into a police station himself. "I've got Jamie Dixon outside the police station," one officer radioed in. Dixon asked what he was being arrested for. He didn't have to wait long for the answer: suspicion of attempted murder. Asad Hussein was the last to fall. Detectives had listened to his version of events, but the evidence told another story. When confronted with the call logs and CCTV they moved in, he was arrested on suspicion of conspiracy. Within days, all three were behind bars. And yet, even as the investigation strengthened, Sarmad's condition grew worse. 4 days after the attack, the case that began as attempted murder would become a murder trial. At Royal Preston Hospital, doctors fought through the night to keep Sarmad alive. The injuries he had suffered were catastrophic. Deep stab wounds to his chest and legs, massive blood loss, organs torn apart. He was placed into intensive care, machines keeping his heart beating, tubes helping him breathe. Every hour felt like a lifetime. His family rushed to his side. Christmas was just days away, but the holiday no longer mattered. Instead of preparing for celebrations, they sat in a hospital ward, staring at their son, their brother, their relative, lying unconscious and broken. The boy who had left home that afternoon to play video games with his friends was now fighting for his life, silent and still. Doctors did everything they could. They performed surgeries, tried to repair the damage, monitored every flicker of his pulse. But the wounds were too severe. For 4 long days, hope rose and fell with every report from the medical team. His loved ones prayed, begged, and pleaded. But slowly, it became clear. He wasn't going to recover. On the 27th of December 2020, 4 days after the attack, the machines could no longer keep him alive. At just 16 years old, Sarmad Al-Saidi was pronounced dead. The police investigation changed instantly. What had been a case of attempted murder was now a full murder inquiry. The evidence against Dixon, Forbes, and Hussein was already strong, but now the stakes were even higher. A teenager's life had been lost, and justice had to be found. For Sarmad's family, the loss was immeasurable. No words could capture the pain of watching a child die so young, so violently. And for the community of Preston, it was another devastating reminder of what knife crime could do. A minor debt, a lingering feud, and a moment of teenage pride had ended a life. The trial began in 2021. By then, detectives had built a solid case. They had CCTV footage of Dixon and Forbes pacing outside the house, their knives flashing in the dim light. They had phone records proving Asad Hussein was in contact with them seconds before the attack. They had social media evidence, voice notes, messages, and even a video where Forbes bragged about stabbing Sarmad. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was heavy. On one side, Sarmad's family sat, still grieving. On the other, 3 teenagers faced the weight of their decisions. The prosecution laid everything out in detail. They described the setup, how Asad lured Sarmad into putting his knife aside, how Dixon and Forbes stormed in, how the attack had been carried out with brutal force. Jurors watched the Snapchat video of Forbes waving a bloodied knife, heard the voice notes where he and Dixon laughed about what they had done. The evidence was overwhelming. Faced with the reality of what was coming, Lemar Forbes chose to plead guilty. He admitted murder, his own words and actions leaving no room for defense. Jamie Dixon, however, denied it. He tried to distance himself, claiming he had not been part of the fatal plan. But the jury wasn't convinced. His history with Sarmad, the CCTV, the messages, it all pointed to one conclusion. He was found guilty of murder. As for Asad Hussein, he didn't wield a knife that night, but the jury saw his role clearly. He had been the one to lure Sarmad, to disarm him, to make sure Dixon and Forbes had their chance. He was convicted, not of murder, but of conspiracy to commit serious assault. The sentences reflected the seriousness of the crime. Jamie Dixon received life in prison with a minimum of 19 years. Lemar Forbes, just 16 at the time of the killing, was also given life with a minimum of 15 years. Asad Hussein was sentenced to 5 years in custody for his part in the conspiracy. In delivering the sentences, the judge spoke directly to the impact of their actions. A young boy was dead, a family destroyed, and 3 teenagers had thrown away their own futures. What had started as a petty feud, fueled by pride and a £25 debt, had ended in bloodshed and life sentences. When the verdicts were read, Sarmad's family sat quietly in court, their grief heavier than any sentence the judge could hand down. For them, no number of years could balance the scales. Their son was gone, taken at 16, and nothing could ever bring him back. In a statement, they spoke of their heartbreak, of birthdays and milestones that would never come, of the silence left in their home where his laughter used to be. They called for change, for an end to knife crime, for young people to understand that carrying weapons only leads to pain and loss. The community of Preston was shaken. The murder of a teenager, so close to Christmas, left neighbors stunned and afraid. Vigils were held, candles lit, prayers whispered for Sarmad and his family. Teachers, youth workers, and community leaders spoke openly about the dangers of knives, reminding young people that one decision, one moment of anger, can destroy multiple lives. Police also made their stance clear. They described the attack as calculated, ruthless, and unnecessary. They warned other young people that knife crime doesn't solve problems, it only creates tragedies. For Dixon, Forbes, and Hussein, those warnings had come too late. Their futures were now locked behind prison walls. The wider lesson was stark. A debt of £25, a teenage feud that could have been forgotten. And yet from those small sparks, an inferno grew. Pride and revenge had blinded 3 boys to the consequences. The result was 1 life lost, 2 lives wasted in prison, and 1 young man branded forever by conspiracy. As we end this story, we ask you, how many more lives must be lost before this cycle stops? How many more families have to suffer before young people understand that a knife never solves a problem, it only creates new ones? If you were moved by Sarmad's story, share it. Talk about it with your children, your friends, your community. And if you believe stories like this must be told, remember to like, share, and subscribe, because behind every headline is a family living with the loss, and their voices must never be forgotten. See you on our next episode.